I have been reading on the Ukrainian nationalists who murdered Polish people during the Second World War. I've been learning about this subject, very dark subject, from this book. It's called Poland's Holocaust by Tadeusz Petrovsky. And as I was reading from this book, my goodness, for a while I have known about what the Ukrainians did to the Poles during the Second World War. But this book has given me a more in-depth understanding as to how demonic these banderists were, these Ukrainian fascists, these fanatical nationalists. And by banderist, I'm speaking of the Ukrainians who revered and followed Stefan Bandera, who wanted to murder not just the Jews, but the Russians and the Poles. And to this day, there are many Ukrainians, especially in Western Ukraine, who revere Stefan Bandera. So in this book, Petrovsky presents the ideology of these Ukrainian nationalists, and he quotes from their writings. He presents quotes from their writings. So in one example, he presents the Great Commandments written out by the UVO. The UVO stood for Ukrainian Military Organization. That's what it stood for. And this was one of the major political and ideological factions that was very much so pushing for Ukrainian nationalism at that time. So in this list of commandments, it reads, quote, "Always and everywhere do what will bring harm to the enemy." So no matter where you are, no matter what you do, make sure that you do harm to the enemy. Ruthlessness, cruelty, sadism. So here is another list of commandments. This is from from an ideological writing called the Decalogue, or in English, the Decalogue, written by Stepan Lekamsky. And this was written in 1928, or 19... It says it appeared in a publication called the Surma in 1928. And it says here that these 10 commandments were used as a set of guidelines by the Union of Ukrainian Nationalist Youth. This was another faction. And it reads, quote, "Do not hesitate to commit the greatest crime if the good of the cause demands it." So if the cause demands that you commit a crime, no matter how horrific the crime is, you do it. If it means committing genocide, you do it, because it will advance the cause. And in this case, the cause is the extermination of Polish people for the advancement and domination of the Ukrainian race. It says, "Regard the enemy of your nation with hate and perfidy." Perfidy means deception, deceitfulness. So don't just hate your enemy, but deceive your enemy. Lie to your enemy. Aspire to expand the strength, riches, and size of the Ukrainian state, even by means of enslaving foreigners. So if you want to enslave foreigners, go ahead. You want to have slaves, commit genocide, lie to your enemy so that you can later on kill him. It's all good. Sounds like Islam, taqiyya, right? But it also reminds me of something else. It reminds me of the ideology of the Operation Werewolf group. This is a far-right network of very, very militant rightists. They call themselves the Wolf Brigade, but they also go under the title of Operation Werewolf. And they have different groups or different cells of this group in the United States, but also in various parts of Western Europe. I know that they have a group in Italy, but they also have followers in Germany, Austria. They are actually very popular amongst the racialist identitarians. And this group, they believe that there is no moral issue with doing wrong to those who are an enemy of your tribe. And this is the type of language that they use. Their ideological leader is a guy by the name of Jack Donovan. He is an American. And he, back in, I want to say 2017, he went to Germany to give a talk. Now, the organization, or the ideological group that organized this talk were the identitarians, German and Austrian identitarians, led by a German far-rightist by the name of Götz Kubitschek. And also one of the people who helped to organize this event was the leader of the Austrian identitarian group. His name is Martin Sellner. And I actually debated this guy, or really confronted him, in 2017. And you can find the video. It's up on YouTube. Type in Schubot Sellner, Sellner. You'll find it. And I questioned Sellner on his movement. I asked him questions regarding his movement. I asked him questions regarding things that were on the website for his identitarian group. And of course, he squirmed around and he tried to weasel his way out. Tried to really weasel his way from being honest with me. But not too long after this, he helped to organize a speech for this guy. He helped to organize an event for this American lunatic by the name of Jack Donovan. So Jack Donovan goes to Germany, and while he was in Germany, and he actually wrote an article about this, he did some sort of a pagan ritual at night for the gods. Very demonic stuff. Very demonic stuff. And Jack Donovan is into bloodletting. He'll cut himself for his religion. Very satanic stuff. And this is the type of insanity that he wants to revive. So he goes to Germany and he does a speech in front of a bunch of German and Austrian right-wing ideologues. And in this speech, he says that there is no moral question as to whether or not committing violence against the enemy, whoever that is good or bad. There is no moral question. There is only the question of, do I want to commit violence, and does this violence advance my cause, and can I get away with said violence? He actually says this in the speech, and he's saying this to a bunch of far-rightists in Germany, and also amongst these far-rightists are identitarians from Austria, Martin Sellner being one of them. He's talking to a bunch of Nazis. He's saying this to Nazis. He's saying, go ahead, commit violence as long as you can get away with it. Play the clip.
Or use it to justify weakness, submission, or inaction. For the noble barbarian, there is no question as to whether violence against people who are not your people is good or evil, or even morally justified. The only important questions about violence are, do I want to use violence? Is initiating violence in this scenario likely to produce a desirable result? Do I have a tactically viable plan for executing this violence? Am I capable of executing this violence effectively to produce the desired result? What are the potential long and short-term risks involved in initiating violence in this scenario? Is the desired result worth those risks? If the answer to all of those questions is yes, then by all means, press play.
So if someone goes to an organization um, orchestrated by people on the far right, and this person is saying, commit violence if you can get away with it, that is ideological terrorism. And I remember I wrote an article about Operation Werewolf, and I showed this clip, and I called Donovan an ideological terrorist. And he sent me an email, very upset, very angry, that I called him an ideological terrorist. And he ended the email with, you're going to be hearing from my lawyer, something like that. And I haven't heard from any lawyer because what I stated was absolute fact. And who the hell is going to argue with me about this? What judge is going to sit there and say, you know what, Mr. Donovan, you're right? After seeing that clip of him talking in Germany, talking like a terrorist, who's going to sit there and argue with me and deny or try to utilize some kind of sophistry to help Donovan weasel his way out of this fact? In fact, I responded to Donovan and I said, well, how about you and I have a little dialogue for my YouTube channel? And he refused to do it. But back to the point, looking at the ideology of these Ukrainian nationalists who murdered tens of thousands of Polish people, when the Ukrainian nationalists, for example, wrote, regard the enemy of your nation with hate and perfidy, that reminded me of when Jack Donovan says that you can lie to those who are an enemy of your tribe. You don't have to be honest with them. When the Ukrainian nationalists wrote, do not hesitate to commit the greatest crime if the good of the cause demands it, it reminded me of when Donovan said, does said violence bring an advantage to your cause? And then in the end, he says, by all means, press play. It's really sickening, but at the same time, it is quite educational in the sense that looking at this history and looking at some of these lunatics today, we can see that there is nothing new under the sun. When old people complain about young people and they say, oh, look, these kids, they're all crazy or they're all immoral, we can go back to the 1920s. We can say, Grandma, look, 1920s, 1930s, before the internet was invented, before iPhones were invented, people were thinking of doing horrific things to their neighbors. There's nothing new under the sun. The violence that was committed against Polish people by Ukrainian fascists was truly unfathomable. It was like Armenian genocide level depravity. There was one story that I heard in which a Polish woman was raped, and after she was raped, the rapist, a Ukrainian fascist, proceeded to carve her lips off her face. Like, horrific stuff. Really horrific stuff. There's nothing new under the sun. Anyway, hope you guys have learned something from this message. You guys heard some theology. God bless.